Alright, let's go ahead and begin your Week 12 lecture. This is your Week 12 lecture. You guys just completed Test 2. Very good job. Very impressed with everything that's been going on with the test and your grades so far. That being said, we are towards the final home stretch of this course, so be sure to keep up the good work, keep on top of your grades, and also please keep in mind that your research paper is due about a month from now. I say it's about a month from now. I want to warn you early, that way you guys aren't so stressed out at the very end of the semester. And also for the fact that you have about 4 weeks left until it's due, so that gives you about an average. If you write about 1 page a week, you guys should be in good shape come that final week of the year. So you have a month ahead of time. If you have questions about your paper, send those my way. I can try to answer those. But it is found on your syllabus, the topic is, and also I will be posting a writing guide that will help you guys out in terms of citation and how to write a proper college paper. So be sure to keep that in mind. I would definitely start on early, that way you're not stressed out, and that way you can edit it and make a good paper from then on. So alright, this week we're going to talk about the Texas Judiciary. It's going to be a very short lecture. The fact is that the Texas Judiciary, to be honest with you, is just a very dry topic. There's not a whole lot that I can teach you about the dynamics of it or anything like that. So we'll get through this lecture. It'll be very short, and we'll make the best of it. So, Texas Judiciary. What's going on with Texas courts? Well, the function of the judiciary, of any judiciary, is very simple. It breaks down into 3 main parts. All judiciary branches do these main 3 points here. First, they use the application of law to individual cases. So they hear cases and they apply the law to them. Makes sense. The whole purpose of the judiciary is to determine whether something broke the law or is legal or illegal. So the application of law to individual cases makes sense. The second one is a little bit tricky. It's judicial review, and that's one thing that we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. But judicial review is very important. It basically determines, once again, whether something is illegal or illegal, but it also allows them to review the actions of other branches of government as well. So the fact that the judiciary has a relationship with the other 2 branches of government, the executive and the legislature, is very important. And it's very important for them in terms of their ability to conduct judicial review. And then finally, some courts hear appeals. That's one function of the judiciary. If there's an appeal, maybe there's a mistrial or something went wrong with the trial, they hear those appeals to determine the legality of that trial, or the validity, I guess I should say, of that particular trial. So those are the 3 main functions of a judiciary. Let's first begin with that first one, application of law. Let's break that one down just a little bit further. Application of law is generally done during the trial setting or in the trial setting. The application of law means finding the facts behind the case. They hear both sides of it, both the plaintiff and the defendant. They find the facts, they research the evidence, and apply it to that particular case. Determining if the law applies to the facts developed, they determine the law, whether the facts are as they say they are, and then interpretation of the applicable law. Law is very unique because it does have a certain element of interpretation to it. One person may read it one way, another person may read it another way. And so that's part of the application of law, is that you must interpret the applicable law to the facts that have developed around the case. Determining the legal rights of each party in the case is also very important, particularly in civil law. You need to determine the rights based on the contract or the arrangement that had happened previously. So determining the legal rights of each party in the case is also very important to application of the law. Now we're going to talk about judicial review. Judicial review occurs when any court determines whether a legislative, executive, or judicial action was valid under the law. So like I said, judicial review deals solely with the court's right to review the actions of other branches and determine the legality of it. Usually these 3 questions generally exist under judicial review when a court is conducting judicial review. Did the policymaking body have the authority to make that policy? Does the legislative branch have the right to pass a particular law? Does the executive branch have the right to execute that particular law in that particular way? It all looks at that different branch of government, that particular policy-making body, and whether they have the authority to conduct that particular policy. Did an executive official act within the scope of the authority granted? That's very important. It's particularly very important when you think of political scandals, such as, let's say, Watergate and Nixon. Did the executive branch, the presidency, Nixon, have the authority to withhold tapes or conduct the burglaries and things like that? Did the executive official act within the scope of the authority granted? And then finally, in terms of judicial action, did a lower judicial court decide correctly? That's part of also the review process, or the appeals process, but it's also part of the judicial review process as well. They need to determine that the court carried out the trial legally, and did it decide correctly in that particular case. Judicial review for all U.S. courts comes from the U.S. Supreme Court, Marbury versus Madison in 1803. Before this case, Marbury versus Madison, courts within the U.S. did not have judicial review. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of Marbury versus Madison because it's a lengthy case, and even if you've taken constitutional law like I have, you probably don't understand it fully because there's a lot of facts surrounding the case, and Wikipedia also doesn't do that great of a job explaining it, to be honest with you. But just know that before that case, no courts had the right to review other branches of government. They didn't have judicial review. So at least know that for your test, that Marbury versus Madison was the landmark case which gave all courts in the United States judicial review, or the power of judicial review. Now, all courts within the United States can look at other branches and make sure that the other branches are conducting their business properly, that they are acting within the authority of their particular institution. That's the idea of judicial review. Finally, all courts, or not all courts, but particular courts are designated for appeals. Courts hear appeal cases if they are deemed worthy. Now, a lot of cases are appealed. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get an appeals hearing. If they're deemed worthy of an appeals hearing, they'll probably get that appeals case. Not all appeals are heard, but if they are heard, all appeals must be based on these three things. First, they must be based on the law and procedure used by the lower court. You must have shown that the law and procedure used by the lower court was not within reason. Appeals can also be based on rules of evidence. If you feel that the evidence was faulty or that it was untrue, it wasn't collected properly, you can appeal on that ground, on those grounds as well. And then finally, the constitutionality of the law or policy applied, you can appeal on that based on whether you think the law is constitutional to begin with, and then the appeals court will determine whether that law was constitutional or not. So those are the three main functions of the judiciary broken down in a very simplistic way. There's a lot that goes on with courts, but for the most part, application of the law, judicial review, and then appeals are the three main functions of any judiciary body. Now, those are the three main functions of the judiciary body. You also need to realize that different courts deal with different types of law. There's private, which is civil law, and then there's the one that we're most familiar with, which is criminal law, or public law, if you will. So let's first deal with private or civil law. Private or civil law simply deals with the rights and duties of persons acting in the promotion of individual interest. It's determined by civil statutes or case law. Major categories of civil law are classified in terms of tort law, contract law, and equity law. Now, tort law, simply if you have an injury, if after injury occurs, to gain the redress of injuries. So you're basically suing someone for damages, or you're taking a civil law case to the court for damages that that were inflicted on you as a victim, or you can think of also civil lawsuits for maybe a major drug company or something like that. The NFL faced a major civil law case for their concussions and their injuries, and you sue under tort law in order to gain reimbursement or damages for those injuries that were inflicted upon you. Contract law, that's pretty self-explanatory. Contract law is simply the binding agreements between two or more parties which the state will enforce. So it's an actual contract that was maybe been violated. And then equity law just seeks to prevent harm by allowing the judge to issue injunctions, stays, restraining orders prior to the damage being done, the person seeking relief. So that's civil also. No one has broken the law yet, but you simply want a court arrangement. These are typically also custody battles as well, but probably the restraining orders is probably the one that's most common, or at least the one that people are most familiar with. You feel like you may be harmed. No harm has been done to you yet, unlike a tort law where injury has already occurred. Equity law is simply to prevent harm before it happens. And then contract law is just between two parties that arranged a contract. So we're kind of familiar with these. There's probably some famous cases you could point to under each of these, but for the most part, private civil law deals with arrangements and injuries and things like that, not necessarily the breaking of a law, which is where public law comes in. Public law is government organization and procedure, power and responsibility of public officials, and then the civil rights of individuals. The one that we're most familiar with under public law, and remember that public law typically deals with a government body, such as the police or something like that. The one that we're most familiar with is the criminal law. Criminal law, where you defines acts against public order and establishes levels of punishment. So if you break public order, which can be anything such serious as it can be something as serious as murder or serial murder or something like that, to something so simple as simply a DUI or speeding. That you're breaking the law, you're breaking a public order in some sense. And so criminal law has a lot of different degrees to it, but it is simply breaking the act of a public order against an act against public order. And there are different established levels of punishment. Second of all, administrative law, structure and organization of governmental agencies. So if there's something wrong with the structure and organization of governmental agencies. And then finally, constitutional law, where you break a law that is established by the Constitution and the rulings of the court. So something that may go against precedent as well. So usually within each of the public law, a government body is involved in some, either the defendant or the plaintiff, and it deals with an established law, or at least by the Constitution or the precedent of the courts. So a little bit confusing, but just know the difference between private law and public law for your test, and you should be good. If you need me to further explain any of these, I feel like I kind of just rambled through all that. So if you need me to explain any of these further, please send those questions my way, and I will try to get them, at least to try to explain them just a little bit better. All right, so those are different types of law. Criminal law is generally broken down into misdemeanors or felonies. And misdemeanors has different classifications. You have Class C through Class A. Class C is the least punishable of this. There's generally things such as speeding tickets, whereas Class A is much more worse, punishable by fine and then jail up to 1 year. Felonies are very, very serious. Felonies, you have Class 4 through Class 1. Class 4 is not that bad. You have a fine, and then you have 180 days to 2 years, also known as a state jail felony. Then you have all the way up to Class 1, which has a $10,000 fine and up to 5 to 99 years for life. So you probably had to do something serious if you're going to receive life in prison. I'm sure you can think of several examples of that. I apologize for the noise. Apparently I forgot to close my Facebook, so forgive me for that, but we'll continue to go from there. All right. Texas courts. Basic features of the Texas court system. The Texas court system is criticized heavily for being very unorganized, very independent, and also very corrupt. Very surprisingly, Texas courts are actually very corrupt, and there's actually a number of scandals that go on within the Texas courts. But the basic features of the Texas court system is, first, it is decentralized. There's no single reporting authority. There's no hierarchy structure that judges are responsible for. Judges oversee their own courts, and that's it. Judges are not responsible to anybody for their own actions. All Texas court systems, all the judges are elected, which is also very surprising, except for municipal judges. But all judges are elected by voters. This is also very surprising. Not many states have elected judges, because on the pro side of that, elected judges, you know what to expect of them. But on the con side of that, elected judges are also politicians. They also have to gain campaign finance, and they're also easily bought, simply, just like a politician as well. Also, they may inflict their own partisan reasonings into judgments when you really want them to be nonpartisan and impartial. Texas court system also features the fact that it is very specialized. Courts generally have specialized jurisdictions, which we're going to talk about here in just a little bit, exactly what jurisdiction is. But just know that they have very specialized jurisdictions, meaning that it's very, very specific. This is the court structure of Texas, and it goes from the very highest courts to the very lowest courts. So let's start here down at the very bottom. On the very municipal level, within the town level, you have justice of peace courts, and you have municipal courts within towns. Moving up, you have the county courts, and then you have the district courts above the counties. Anything that is appealed within the county court or the district court may go to the court of appeals. The courts of appeals hears appeals cases. And you have 14 different courts of appeals within Texas, 14 different districts based on geographical region. Now let's say something was appealed from the county and district court into the Court of Appeals. And the Court of Appeals can't quite decide if the appeal was valid or if they should make a ruling on it. Then it will either go to the Texas Supreme Court or the Court of Criminal Appeals. This is a very unique feature of Texas courts, is the fact that we have two courts at the state level which are of equal level on the hierarchy, but hear very different types of cases. The Texas Supreme Court hears mostly civil cases. If there's a civil lawsuit that has to go through the Texas Supreme Court, it has to go to this level. It'll be the Texas Supreme Court which hears it. That's civil law. Criminal law goes to the Court of Criminal Appeals, the highest criminal court in all of Texas. This is the highest civil court within Texas. This is the highest criminal court within Texas. So that's how the court's structured. You have everything from municipal courts, which are very, very tiny. They have a small jurisdiction, and they mainly reside within town matters, all the way up to the Supreme Court, which hears civil law, and the Court of Criminal Appeals, which hears criminal cases. Let's go ahead and talk about jurisdiction. You see the municipal, you see the county, you see the district, but you also see the Texas-wide state courts as well. This all depends on the court level and therefore the jurisdiction. Courts are divided in Texas by their jurisdiction. Jurisdiction, simply defined, and I can guarantee this definition will be on your test, is simply the sphere of authority a court has. It's either issue-based or geography-based. There's different types of jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is the sphere of authority a court has. You can have original jurisdiction, appellate jurisdiction, exclusive jurisdiction, and then also you can break it down geographically as well. So, original jurisdiction is the court of origin, the original court that has the original jurisdiction and hears the case and evidence first and establishes the record of the case. And those are usually based on geographical regions, whether it happened within the municipality, happened at the county level, or happened maybe even it's a statewide crime, which would be actually very, very serious. That's the original jurisdiction. Appellate jurisdiction hears appeals cases from lower courts. That means they have the right to hear the appeal. That's their sphere of authority, is to hear appeals. The appellate jurisdiction. Exclusive jurisdiction means a court has the sole right to hear the case. No other court can hear that case. That would be something like a statewide crime where it can only go to the Texas Supreme Court or it can only go to the Court of Criminal Appeals. They're the only court that gets to hear the case, and so whatever record is established during that case doesn't get to move on to another court, doesn't get to be heard on appeal. They have exclusive jurisdiction. Now you can also think of jurisdiction in terms of geography as well. A court is within the geographical area in which the crime or lawsuit took place. They're within that geographical area that crime or lawsuit took place, so they're the ones that get to hear it because it happened within their geographical jurisdiction. Now, Texas gets very confusing because they have those 14 courts of appeals and they have those 14 districts, and their courts are generally broken down based on district. But there are certain points within Texas in which the districts overlap, and that's why Texas courts get very confusing. If you read in your textbook, you will see that districts sometimes overlap, and so who has jurisdiction based on geography can get really confusing. Texas courts also divide their jurisdiction based on whether the court case deals with civil law or criminal law. So once again, if it's a civil lawsuit, it will go to the Texas Supreme Court. If it's a criminal lawsuit, it will go to the Court of Criminal Appeals. Based on the crime committed or the lawsuit that is being proposed, also determines how whether courts get to hear that case or not. This is why Texas courts is so confusing, because there's so many ways it breaks down. Contrast this to my home state of Kansas, where Kansas has a very simple, straight line sort of structure. If it doesn't succeed in this court, it'll go to the next court, to the next court, to the next court. Whereas Texas courts, it's very ambiguous who gets to hear the case first and who actually gets to hear the appeal and things like that. That's why Texas courts are very, very confusing. You can read about this in your textbook. There's actually on one of the pages it says Texas versus Kansas, and so you can see how my home state does it versus how Texas does it. So jurisdiction, very, very important for your test. I can guarantee there will be a question on your test about jurisdiction. So if you need to pause this slide, review this slide real quick, definitely do so. Feel free to do so. But moving on. Let's go ahead and talk about local level trial courts. These are the municipal courts. They have criminal jurisdiction only. Only if it's a criminal case does it matter, or do municipal court. Only if it's a criminal case do municipal courts actually get to hear the case. Municipal courts are established by each municipality, meaning each town. They mainly enforce city ordinances, but they also operate under state law and local supervision. So if there's a question, if someone broke the state law, then municipal courts may get to hear that case as well. Justices of the peace courts are established in the Constitution, and they mainly deal with civil lawsuits, so civil law. You see the kind of breakdown over here. Civil lawsuits, justices of the peace courts deal with it if it's less than $200 or $200 to $5,000, and then criminal cases are heard as long as they're up to a Class C misdemeanor. I won't go through each of these on each slide. It just kind of breaks it down so you can see who gets to hear or who has that jurisdiction over that particular case. Moving on from local level trial courts to county level courts, these are constitutional courts. They hear usually the civil law cases that deal with $200 to $5,000, and then $500, and it varies by county. Criminal, they deal with Class A and Class B misdemeanors. And then you have the county courts at law. They're civil. They have different civil laws. They have different civil law requirements, as well as, and then with the criminal, they also deal with Class A and Class B. So we went from local to county. Moving on to district level courts, general district courts, or specialized courts. They're established by the legislature. So going back one slide, these are established by the Constitution. These are established by the legislature. They deal with civil lawsuits and criminal lawsuits. Criminals, they can deal with all felonies. So regardless of the misdemeanor or felony classification, they can deal with all felonies. And then you see the reasons for the civil lawsuits as well. $500 to $5,000. They also deal with divorces, land titles, elections, probates, things like that as well. So those are your district level courts. Then you have the intermediate courts of appeals. These are the 14 district courts. If you go back to a few slides to that hierarchical structure, these are the 14 district courts. You have the Court of Appeals, which is broken down into those 14 districts. They deal both with criminal and civil jurisdiction. They hear appeals from the county and district courts. If something wasn't decided in a county or a district court, then it moves up to the Court of Appeals. And they hear those appeals. If they're deemed worthy, they hear those appeals from those county and district courts. The courts have from 3 to 12 justices, depending on the district, as determined by the legislature. The legislature will tell them, well, this Court of Appeals will have 3 judges, this Court of Appeals will have 12 justices. Cases are heard in panels of 3 judges, which is very unique. All appeals cases are only heard by 3 judges, and then those 3 judges determine the facts of the case or the outcome of the case. Not all 12 justices get to hear every case. There's so many appeals per year, or there's so many appeals on the docket that only 3 judges need to be here, 3 justices need to be here, 3 justices need to be here to try to get through it all. There's so many appeals cases. And that's one criticism of the Texas court system as well. The highest appeals courts are obviously the Texas Supreme Court and then the Court of Criminal Appeals. And as I've already stated, the Texas Supreme Court deals with civil law only. The Court of Criminal Appeals deals with criminal lawsuits only. You have 9 justices to each, which are elected in statewide partisan elections. They're elected in partisan elections. They actually have to run on a Republican or Democratic ticket to actually gain that election. They serve 6-year overlapping terms, meaning that 3 of them are up for election every 2 years. They serve 6-year terms. 3 of them are up this 2 years, 3 of them are up this 2 years, 3 of them are up this 2 years. Much like how the Senate works if you're in my federal government course as well. So, just know that these are the 2 highest appeals courts in all of Texas, and they get the final say. There's no more appealing after this. These courts get to hear and have the final say, and whatever the outcome is what the outcome is. There's no more further appealing beyond that. Let's go ahead and talk just a little bit about juries as well. We talked enough about the courts and the court levels. The juries is very, very important, particularly because you as a citizen may be called to serve on a jury. Now there's grand juries and trial juries. Now the grand juries, they have 12 members. They're selected by a jury commission, which is appointed by the district judge. The district judge appoints this jury commission, and then they select the 12 members to be on this grand jury. May issue a true bill or indictment on vote of 9 members. So they can render their decision as long as 9 of the 12 agree. All testimony is given in secret, and so they have a very good opportunity to get to know the facts of the case and the evidence behind the case. Contrast that with trial juries, which you have 12 jurors per county, and then you have 12 at the district level. So 12 jurors at the county level, and then 12 at the district level, depending if it's a county court or a district court. Prospective jurors are called by random. You usually get a notice in the mail that you've been called for jury duty. You have to report there on that day. You'll go to the court, you'll get a number, and then if they raffle your number out, basically, then you have to serve on that jury for that day. There are certain exemptions. Fortunately, most of you are students. You don't have to worry about being called onto the jury yet, or you're under 18, so you don't have to worry about being called on the jury yet. There are exemptions if you're over 70, which none of us are, I don't believe. But if you're over 70, you don't have to serve on a jury. If you have custody of young children, you don't have to serve on a jury. And also, if you're a full-time student, you don't have to serve on a jury. So I've actually been called for jury duty here in Texas, which is very surprising since I've only been here for 3 years. Because I was a full-time student at that time, I didn't have to actually serve on the jury, but I did have to go at least report to the courthouse and then give my exemption reason. So trial juries are very fascinating. You probably will be called to serve on jury duty at one time or another. So if you have further questions about juries and how they work or anything like that, feel free to send those questions my way. It is a very important part, or at least a very important duty as an American citizen, to serve on a jury of your peers. So, if you have any questions about juries and how they work in Texas, be sure to send those my way, and I'll try to answer those and clarify that a little bit better. I can guarantee there will be a question about the juries on your test, so if you need to review this slide, feel free to pause the video right now. Alright, so like I said, Texas courts are really criticized for a number of reasons, and let's go ahead and talk about just the major concerns of the judicial system at large in terms of their structure and operational functions. A lot of people are concerned about the structure of the Texas court system. It's not simplistic, and it's not necessarily clear who gets jurisdiction. So structural reorganization with clearer boundaries would actually serve the Texas court system very well. You would have clearer lines of authority. You'd be able to determine jurisdiction a lot easier. You'd be able to have the court cases heard a lot quicker, and you'd be able to be sure where your appeal is going to go, more or less. Another structure and operational concern is just simply compensation for victims of a crime. Texas court systems are very well known for not compensating the victims of a crime very well. You also have very crowded dockets. Like I said, there's so many appeals cases in the Texas Court of Appeals, or at the appellate level, I guess I should say, that not every case is heard. It has to be deemed worthy of an appeal. But if you lessen the documents a little bit more, maybe create another district or two, then that would relieve the stress on one particular appellate court district and put it onto another appellate court district, and that way you're able to get through more cases per year and get through this crowded docket. And then finally, judicial compensation and retirement. There's a lot of talk about how the pay of judges, and then also the fact that not very many of them retire. A lot of them are elected, so they keep getting elected continually. And that's where you get into the political concerns over the judicial system. The fact is that because judges have to run partisan elections, they have to run for election each year, or every 2 years, I guess you should say. Or they have to run for election every time their term is up, I guess you should say. There are certain judges that run every 2 years. But anyways, because these judges have to run a partisan election, you have the influx of money into the judicial system. The judicial system is supposed to be not influenced by money, not supposed to be influenced by campaign contributions, and not supposed to be partisan. However, in Texas, you have all of those things. You have campaign contributions to candidates for judge. They're just gaining money based on political support. Partisan elections focus on political issues rather than judicial competency. So you have a lot of partisan rhetoric, not necessarily a merit-based system based on the time that a person has served as judge, or the time and education of the judge. Rather, it's just political talking points rather than judicial competency. At-large elections also eliminate minority judges. Texas has a huge problem with its judges because there's not very many minorities that are serving as judges. Minorities are not able to win due to the at-large elections, which favor Republicans. And then finally, disciplining and removal of judges. Removing judges is very, very hard, and the fact that they're not responsible to anyone. Remember, it's a decentralized system. They're not responsible to anyone except for the voters. And because the voters tend to vote judges in over and over again, which is called the incumbency effect, removing a judge is very, very difficult. Voters don't want to remove judges because those judges already have name recognition and they already are part of a political party which they agree with. So voters don't tend to remove judges even if they have been involved in a scandal. For the purpose of your discussion board question today, or this week, you're going to read about a particular judge which was not removed even though her actions were questionable and may not have complied with actual law. So she was involved in this sort of scandal, or she was put in the spotlight, I guess I should say, and was still not removed from her own seat based on the elections. So, talking about your discussion board questions, here they are. You have 3 of them for this week. First, I want you to read page 196 and 197 from your textbook. What is your opinion on the use of the death penalty in Texas? This was a highly controversial death penalty case, which will be laid out on page 196 and 197. What is your opinion on the death penalty? Should Michael Richard have been executed that day? And should Judge Sharon Keller have been responsible for his death? So you'll read the facts of this case. It's actually a very fascinating case. It's worth your time for reading. And I want you to at least think about the consequences of elected judges and also the consequences of major political issues such as the death penalty. Second of all, what are the pros and cons to having judges elected, similar to politicians? Does the election of judges lead to corruption? And should judges be nonpartisan in their judgment? Read page 197 and 208 to 210. That short little reading will give you a good idea about the pros and cons of having judges elected, and also maybe kind of get you to think about whether this is corruption or whether this is actually a good thing. So weigh the pros and cons. And then finally, do you think Texas should reconsider the way in which judges are selected? Are voters well informed? Think about the voters that are voting for these judges. Are the voters well informed enough to select judges? Do you even know your own county judges or your district judges or anything like that? Think about that as well when you choose your answer. Are voters well informed enough to select judges based on their merit and records? Are they voting simply just because of their party affiliation, or are they actually voting for their merit, meaning their work and their qualifications? Consider page 209 and 210 when answering. So if you read these 5 pages, 196, 197, 208, 209, and 210, you should get a great idea about how the Texas court system works, and maybe what are the flaws or what are the efficiencies, the pros to the Texas court system. So those are your discussion board questions. Go ahead and answer those. Once again, this is week 12. We're on the downhill slide, so keep up the good work. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. If you have questions about your grade, don't hesitate to ask as well. And hopefully you guys can finish strong. So that's what I'll leave you for this week with Texas courts. If you have any questions, concerns, or otherwise, please do send those my way. Have a good week.